Okay, I'm going to call this meeting of the Water Supply Planning Committee to order. It's May 5th. Let's call the roll.
Director Anderson?
Here.
Director Paul?
Here. Now,
And I will be contacting Director Edwards to attend as the alternate. I have not heard back from Director Lindor.
okay.
Just move me over, Sarah.
Okay. We have our
Thank you. Thank you, Director Edwards. We will have a third. Director Edwards, the alternate on this committee, is going to be moved over as a panelist so he can participate.
He has been moved over.
Thank you. Okay, any additions or corrections to the agenda?
No, other than the difficulty with some of those slides, but Sarah mentioned she's got it available. So
Yes, good. So we'll use that. So, are there any members of the public on? Or
Yes, we have 2 members of the public and 2 staff persons observing.
Good. And anyone in the conference room? Anybody in person?
No.
Okay. So this is a time in our agenda to address the committee. If there are any members of the public that would like to do that, please raise your hand.
Chair Paul, I see no raised hands.
Okay. So we'll move on to our first action item is the minutes from the March 3rd meeting. Are there any questions or corrections to the minutes?
I found none, and I recommend that we adopt the minutes.
And I'll second it.
Thank you. See, we have to have a roll call vote, don't we?
Yes. Okay. Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director Edwards?
Yes.
Chair Paul?
Yes.
Minutes are adopted 3-0.
Thank you. And I will move on to item 2, the Seaside Municipal Well funding request. Is that going to be John?
no, that'll be me.
Okay.
And this is purely an informational item. Last year, we submitted a community project funding request through Congressman Panetta's office for a redundant or second Seaside municipal well. I think everyone kind of agrees that it's eventually a replacement for their municipal well number 4. That funding request was requested at $3.2 million, knowing in full disclosure that it would be something less. They needed about $1 million to close the funding gap at that time. I'm not sure what the city of Seaside's situation is at this time, but in that process last year, the city was then approached by Congressman Panetta's office, but it was during that interim time that the acting city manager was actually the, I think the fire chief or police chief. They filed a letter, but they didn't submit through the portal. So there was a little bit of confusion at the congressman's office. We stepped aside and allowed the city to then become the lead. And Liz Jacobson, who's the staffer on Panetta's staff, kind of was fine with everything. Their letter of request only requested $1 million, but the budget that Nisha, who was then public works director at the city, she's now long gone. It really was a bigger budget, the budget that we had submitted. So we brokered with Liz, the staffer, what the right number should be based on the city's budget, but then instructed them to basically treat it as the city's request. All worked out. They achieved a $1.1 million grant recommendation. When the House and the Senate were coming together to look at the differences in the funding requests, it looked like that was going to survive. And in fact, it did survive a continuing resolution. But then ultimately, the continuing resolution that's currently keeping our federal government open and alive right now was passed, I think it was late January, and all the earmarks were out.
Right.
So for this current cycle, the congressman is committed to re-requesting all of the lost earmarks from last year.
Mhm.
So we also have earmark requests for a separate program under the Army Corps of Engineers that are in with Senators Padilla and Schiff. We did not make a community funding request on our own behalf, but we once again kind of poked the city saying, hey, Panetta's office has a couple things they need from you. And then I had interaction with their assistant city manager and then ultimately their new city manager, and they got all their work done on time. And then we provided this letter of support. So hopefully they will once again receive a grant in this cycle for the 2026 fiscal year.
Thank you, Dave, for that. But it seems very possible that the money will not materialize with all the huge cuts that are being considered.
Yeah, so I'm really hopeful for them. We intentionally didn't even bother with a request because we're so pessimistic and on what's going to get fulfilled. So
Yeah. I just have one question, and it's in the middle of the letter, which is Exhibit 2A in the agenda packet. The letter says that historically, when the Seaside District had a problem with its potable well, it got water from Cal-Am through an emergency intertie, and then in May 2023, Cal-Am said can't do that anymore. So I don't know if this matters, it may not, but what's the reason for the change?
right, and that's what kind of pushed them into this gray area. So technically, the Division of Drinking Water would, require two sources of supply, and so the second source of supply was always deemed to be the intertie. With the extraction well capacity constraints and the issue they had with us taking ASR well number 1 away from them as a production well, they were becoming concerned that both they wouldn't have enough extraction capacity to maximize their resources, and they were learning to live within the constraints of the cease and desist order.
Mhm.
And so they, loosely signaled that, hey, we might not be able to serve you, or we might not be able to meet 100% of your need. In other words, Cal-Am's not going to overdraw the Carmel River in order to provide backup water for the city. That was the implication. And so it was just kind of a recognition that, beginning in 2021, they were now constrained to only 3,376 acre feet off the Carmel River, but they kind of manifested it in 2023 instead of 2021.
I see. But physically, the emergency intertie arrangement is still feasible?
It is.
Okay. All right. I was just wondering about that and thought it might be related to the other well constraints. Thank you. Yes, Director Anderson.
On the same point, is there a project that's imminent, that's coming up, that would resolve this problem for Cal-Am?
Yeah, well, it depends on what the problem really is. So the extraction capacity will be, vastly improved with the two new bayonet extraction wells or production wells. The tightness they sensed that they were around, available supplies being just enough to meet available demand. That'll be ameliorated with the pure water expansion coming online at the end of the calendar year. So there will be enough water in the system to deal with an emergency at the muni system. So I think that intertie solution will still be a viable solution. But it was driven by, just the simple, hey, we're a little tight on supply versus demand, and we're a little tight on our ability to produce the supply. In other words, extract it out of the ground. And so that's where this uncertainty got started. But yeah, for the immediate near term, the expansion coming online should have, produced more than enough available water.
And what's the timeline on those wells?
So yeah, so they gave Marine an end of the year kind of timeline, and I think we're a little concerned. Does that really mean the beginning of next year, or does it mean November? What does it? But
right.
And if I'm sorry, Amy, did you have more
I
questions?
just said thank you. No, it's okay.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Director Edwards.
Yeah, Dave, we have water in the basin, right?
yep.
How hard is it for us to let Seaside use some of our water and draw it through their pipes since the water is in the basin for emergencies?
Yeah,
What kind of problem will we have doing that or trying to get something like that?
Yeah, no, that's workable. The real problem is they just have the one well for the muni system. So those, 2,900 customers, the 800 connections.
Right.
Yeah, all of this is just about the fragile nature of relying on a single municipal well for the Seaside municipal system. So even if we said, go ahead and use our water, if their well is out, they can't get it. That's the
right. Okay, now I understand it.
Yeah.
So any way we can get a well in there?
So they identified some well sites. John and Marine have looked at them. We've got kind of what I call the no-fly zone, but it's the no-drill zone for the Pure Water project. They have sites that are outside of that zone. So I think ultimately they're in a position to, build a well. They just need to get the funding source together and then build it. And I think the emergency intertie will work as an interim measure. But yeah, long term, I don't think we have to step in. Seaside wants to build the new well. Marina Coast Water District apparently offered to build it for them on their behalf. But I think, Seaside wants that independence and autonomy that they want to do it themselves.
About I'm sorry, I was just going to ask how much.
No, go ahead, because I'm going back to another question of us not putting in for grants or anything. I know how the country is now, stuff being thrown out, stuff being thrown in, but we still ought to do it.
Yeah,
I
and
know
we do.
waste of time, but I feel we still ought to do it to show that we need something.
Yeah, and we did for the it's called Section 219. It's an Army Corps of Engineer Environmental Infrastructure, or EI program. So we do have that one out there. The difficulty with the congressman's office is he's limited to 15.
Right.
And when his district got redrawn, there were a lot of new players involved. And so I don't think we've made his cut on our request for about 3 cycles now.
Okay.
About how much does it cost to build that new well, put in the new well?
You know, 4 million is a good number. You know, all
Oh,
there's,
I guess the Seaside District will, have to figure out a way to get the funding one way or another. And
and as I mentioned last year, Nisha Patel, who was their public works director, said they were, you know, just over $1 million short. They've already expended a lot of pre-construction dollars. So, you know, when we talk total budget, there's sunk costs already. But I looked at the budget, the 3.2 that we put in, I think was like 75% of the budget or 80% of the total budget. So, you know, that implied some local match, but they've already met their local matching with the pre-construction dollars.
And then I guess if they are unable to fund it, they could talk again with Marine Coast Water District or this district to find another solution.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. And
Yeah, interestingly, you know, kind of separate from all of this, Marina Coast has approached us to see if they can use excess injection capacity to store water in the Seaside Basin. But they currently don't have a extraction well that could produce that water. So they'd be storing water with no means to produce it. And, you know, doing something joint with the city of Seaside would enable them to extract. But, you know, Rem, every time we talk, he said, "Oh, don't worry about that. We'll deal with that issue." So, you know, we're working on how could we inject, but there's still that question of why would we inject if they don't have a way to extract?
One more question from me. You
Yes,
may
please.
have already said this. What shape is that well in? Is it expected to fail or is it okay?
Yeah, it's, you know, it's not for us to malign somebody else's asset, but it's a troubled asset.
Okay,
It needs some work
that's
or replacement.
explanatory. Thank you.
Dave, at our next regular meeting, are you going to bring that up? This grant that Seaside trying to get that we helped out?
No, probably wait. You know, we'll definitely have a recap of the year's legislative outreach activities, but I want to wait and see what happens too, because I also don't want to get people's expectations up if potentially all of the community project funding all get wiped out in either another continuing resolution or the budget. So
well, my old saying is this: if you say something, they know that we're doing it. If it fails, they know we're not at fault.
yeah.
So that's my reason why I constantly keep telling us we need to keep reminding the people of what's going on, because if the federal government fail us, we know that we done put it in, and they know that we done put it in. So that's my big push, to constantly update. I even told Seaside about that. You need to keep telling the people what's going on, because they look at election time like they never heard anything.
Yeah.
Why it takes so long?
I agree 100%. And, maybe we should put this on the agenda just as a discussion item, just to inform everybody.
Just keep people informed. I know it's constant.
Yeah.
I know we just need to tell them.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a very short discussion, but to tell them that this money was yanked and tell them why.
Why it was yanked.
Doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Sarah, while you're on here, make a note to include our correspondence and correspondence sent or received.
Yes, please do.
Okay.
I know it's repetition, but we need to do it because we forget.
Yeah, Thank you for reminding us.
Yeah.
As
Yeah,
you
well,
always,
some we'll forget, so.
all right, I think we're ready to move on to next item. Follow up on the Water Master Board workshop on April 2nd.
Yeah, workshop. So we have a prepared presentation, Maureen does, but did you want to go through the Water Masters presentation first, just to see
You
it?
know, because I wasn't able to read all of it, yeah, I would like to take a few minutes. I'm sorry for those who have already digested it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Sarah, can you put it up? Okay, so they, meaning the Water Master, canceled their regular meeting, but then went ahead and scheduled a workshop at the same time, which created some confusion. So we did not have representation at the meeting. Our staff did observe the meeting and found a lot of what was talked about quite interesting. So they prepared a PowerPoint called informational presentation to the board on what's the problem.
But you
And
said it wasn't a board meeting.
it was a workshop. So
Uh-huh.
it was the same folks, but the regular board meeting had been canceled and this was in its place.
Okay.
But the manner in which they canceled was confused. I think it was confusing. And so our district rep was not in attendance. They did not do a full web video recording, but we did get the sound of the meeting, which didn't pick up everything, but it picked up quite a bit of it. And so we've had the chance to listen to the meeting.
Good.
Even though John and Maureen were both, I think both of them, they can chime in, but I think they witnessed this in real time.
Mhm.
Good.
And
Okay.
so the Water Master defined two categories of problems: the physical problems, which precipitate their stated belief that protective water levels and replenishment water need to be secured. There's a range of how much water per year is actually needed. And we have been questioning just simply most recently the leakage issue, because the need for protective water levels is kind of a twofold or maybe threefold issue. And John, you can weigh in here at your leisure. But if there is leakage, then you need to replenish what leaks. If the current take actually exceeds, a true natural safe yield, then we would still be reducing water levels in the aquifer itself. And so you would need to see either an adjustment in the adjudicated allocations for everybody lower, or some form of replenishment. And then there's the past practice of really what led us to these step downs, the overdraft. And so previous overdraft needs to be paid for or paid back. And so there's a program that CalAm has agreed to do 700 acre feet of in lieu recharge per year for 25 years, once they've got, in their mind, a new desalination plant online to help meet customer demand so that they can pump less off the seaside groundwater basin. And then I guess there'd be a fourth area, which would be that nobody really knows where the sea level front is. There's been some detection of salty water going from the sand perch sand dune aquifer into certain monitoring wells, but it's not truly evidence of seawater intrusion. But the concern is there's some out there, and there's still this, call it a teacup depression, And so if the head of the basin could be increased, especially near the coast, then you've got greater pressures that would be pushing back against seawater. And so just conceptually, theoretically, more water in the basin would increase that hydraulic head and, create a barrier against seawater intrusion should it be threatening. So anyway, those are the physical type problems, but then they went to the second problem, which is, next slide, please, Sarah. Okay, well, this is the physical problems. So here, some diagrams. You can see the concept of water flowing out over the political boundary. We've talked about the difference between political boundaries and
Yes,
hydrogeologic boundaries.
yes.
They cited, go ahead, the next slide. They cited, look what happened in North County, and here's, seawater intrusion maps for the 180 in the Salinas Valley. So seawater intrusion is a real threat, according to the water master, and which, we would agree with, of course. Next slide.
And so do we have reasonably reliable data? I mean, by we, I mean everyone. Is there good data on that, on the extent of the seawater intrusion?
Well, so every time, and there is a seawater intrusion plan and an annual assessment at the water master. John can go into some greater detail on that. But the couple of times that there's been concern over the high TDS level in a monitoring well, it's pretty much been kind of traced back to cross-contamination because of a casing failure or well failure, and not direct seawater intrusion from overpumping the aquifer and pulling seawater into the aquifer.
I'd say too, Dave referenced what's called the Seawater Intrusion Response Plan, and there are a number of criteria that need to be met by the data that is collected from the wells, that once those are met, then the board will declare that there's seawater intrusion in the Seaside Basin, and then move into moving pumping away from the portion of the basin that's becoming intruded. To date, the wells that we are sampling at the coast have not exhibited any data that can be characterized as seawater intrusion, and therefore there's not been declarative seawater intrusion. So this is all just being proactive on the water master's part to prevent seawater intrusion, which has not been detected as of yet.
Thank you, John.
Sarah, let's go back one slide. And so the second problem, the first one being physical problems. The second problem is apparently this institutional problem with our district. And Bob Jakes presented this, but basically their accusation is that we're discounting the risk of seawater intrusion, which I would say is not really the case, that we're questioning the importance of achieving protective groundwater elevations, questioning the loss of groundwater from the basin, and questioning the need for or the amount of replenishment water needed to protect the basin. In our defense, I would say the third bullet point is accurate, because we've said the concept of leakage is not possible and not true. Theoretically, it's possible. I mean, if we were to fill up the cup so well that now we're at the lip, then it could pour out and become losses, but we're not in that condition. And it's not questioning the need for protective levels. We have in fact questioned the amount, because it's less if you inject it near the ocean, and it's more if you inject it upland, and it's even more if you're trying to fill a depression first before you get any effective protective levels. And so you would have to, fill the depression until it's fully full, and then it'll have impact further down the hill towards the ocean. And so, yeah, we've questioned how well they've analyzed the solution and how, frankly, there's a lack of a physical infrastructure plan in place that would describe where you would inject and how much would you need to inject once you establish the where issue. So some of what's written here we have questioned, but we've never come firmly down in opposition to protective water levels. And so I think there's a misunderstanding here, and certainly a misunderstanding of the intent of our communication, our letter to them that was included in the pact. Next slide, please, Sarah.
Well, Dave, before you move to the next one, here's a question for you, and probably for Mr. Laredo. If they found it was seawater is being injected in, do they have the authority to tell people to move their pumping around, or do they have to go through us in a way of a second opinion or something? Or are we stuck with that opinion that is seawater intrusion?
Yeah, and John, maybe you want to answer that rather than Michael, but you know, there is a seawater intrusion response plan, and they're looking at perhaps modifying it, but yeah, the water master determines harm. And so if their consultant said, this is the real thing, we've got seawater intrusion, then that plan would kick into place.
Yeah.
Okay, and we have to follow that plan without really getting a second opinion. That's the problem that I sort of like picking up. They could declare something, and we're the water management agency and said, well, we don't see it.
Yeah.
So that's my problem, and just get it cleared up fast. What's y'all opinion? Is we stuck with that?
No,
Lawyers?
no. No, anytime they make a formal decision, it can be challenged. We have to challenge within 30 days of the action. And so, yes, they have the authority to tell you to move a well if indeed, this is the determination. But I think the point that Dave Stolt was making is even more important, is how did they reach this conclusion?
Right.
And right now, there are significant differences in the interpretation of the data and the newer data that we have seen. So I think the simple answer, Director Edwards, is we have an opportunity, if the water master takes formal action, to appeal it. The appeal must be done within 30 days.
And who do we appeal to?
The court.
Well, if we're challenging a formal action of the water master, we would be going back to the judge.
Okay.
Thank you, Fran.
I could add too that there are scientific standards and certain criteria that need to be met, specifically thresholds of chlorides and looking at the molar ratios between chlorides and sodium. And so these are all written into the seawater intrusion response plan. So it would have to be scientifically supported data that would that the district, frankly, if saw that, would agree with that data. But we haven't seen that yet.
Okay, I just want to know what road we take if something like this should happen.
At this point, does it appear that the water master has considered the newer data that we gave them recently?
Well,
Do they understand the point of that information and what the experts said about the
lack of leakage. Yeah.
Yeah, the lack of leakage, the fact that the boundary is actually shifting depending on conditions.
Yeah,
The
and
hydrologic boundary.
yeah, and what was made clear, and Bob Jakes, on behalf of staff at the Watermaster, tried to reiterate a point where he said, well, I asked our consultants if this changes anything. But he asked the same question that's previously been asked, and so you get the same answer, which is if you live with the political boundary, the northern boundary of the basin, then yeah, there's flows across that boundary. There's flows out and there's flows in. The out appears to be greater than the flows in. So if you only ask that question again, you're going to get the same answer, which is, yeah, there's net loss of water across the northern boundary.
And that's what he meant by the question, does that change anything?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was- Okay.
And
Okay.
so if he had wanted to change the question, which is, and think of it this way, if there is a hydrologic divide, meaning water isn't going uphill and over that divide and then is lost to the Monterey subarea of the Salinas Basin, then it's very likely what it's doing is staying on this side of the divide. That's why it's a divide, and then maybe flowing towards the ocean. But it still means it's being held within the general geographic boundary that we've been talking about and doing its job. If it's flowing towards the ocean, it's helping to prevent seawater intrusion.
Mhm.
That, northerly section of the coastline.
Mhm.
So, and that's really the premise of my letter. And I think I even stated somewhere in there that the water's not leaving the basin, it's leaving the boundary.
Uh-huh.
And if it's staying in the basin, it's serving to protect against seawater intrusion. So I think, there's obviously a difference in nomenclature and a difference in defining the problem. But what I heard in the meeting was the Seaside Watermaster is saying, we're going to stick with our jurisdictional boundary, our political boundary. And that's the nature of our concern. So to Director Edwards' point, in effect, it's like, thank you for your second opinion, but we're sticking with our own first opinion here. We're not going to change, Watermaster's not going to change its thinking just because of this other way to look at it, which we think is probably the better way to look at it. But
So I have a question, because I have not been attending these Watermaster meetings and I don't know the players other than, that our staff that participates. Is there any chance that talking a staff to staff level that, let's say John Lear talking with someone there who is, just can look at the data objectively, can read the information we gave them and just try to understand it on a technical basis, putting aside politics. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. Because we haven't gotten, it sounds like the way you're relating the conversation, we haven't gotten through, the point hasn't been heard yet. But is it possible that it could be heard in a conversation at a staff level or at another level? It seems like there needs to be a better communication. Another effort to communicate might be worthwhile, but who should talk to whom, that I don't know, because I don't know enough about the players, but maybe you know. Do you agree that it may be worth the effort to have a conversation about this information?
yeah, normally we would have expected basically, the water masters say, hey, we got this letter from the district, and then have the technical advisory committee, of which John is currently the chair, dig into it.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
That
But that
isn't what-
didn't, and that didn't happen.
It did not happen. I know John,
So they bypassed it.
yeah.
Mhm.
And there was no real response, any detailed response to the information that we got from Montgomery and Associates?
Maureen or John, do you want to weigh in on that? And where does this sit with respect to the TAC?
It's not been agendized at the TAC. That's something that we as a member of the TAC could request to agendize this. And it was clear to me, and I can yield the floor to Maureen after this, that the court document says this is the boundary you have to manage in, and the statement was made, how are we supposed to be responsible for areas outside of where we have authority? And so it wasn't really it sounded to me like the jurisdictional legal document was going to be accepted and not
Yeah.
the moving of the boundary.
Mhm.
But still,
Yeah.
is it still worth agendizing?
John, do you think that makes sense to agendize it and at least have a discussion that to make sure the technical information is, the technical point is understood?
I
Yeah,
think
'cause
we
it's
can
new stuff.
we can request it. Yeah, I think that and to your question, I think that there are some members of the Water Master Board that have that are trained as registered geologists and think and engineers as well, and would understand the technical component of the moving of the boundary and it not being coincident with the jurisdictional boundary. I do believe people, but I don't know if there's enough voices that uh, would come over the voices that are saying use the jurisdictional boundary.
Yeah.
Excuse me, but when I read this letter from Montgomery and Associates, if I were sitting in a room of people considering this, their tone is so neutral.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great letter. It's not, it doesn't feel at all political when they talk about, you know, what the older data is. I mean, it's partly was limited by technology available at the time. And that's always the case with something as technical as this. It seems like people could be just, just reading 2 pages of it, they might kind of say, oh, this makes sense, and this isn't an assault on our independence. It's nothing personal. I That's what I would think if I looked at it.
Well, I think the statement was made that the water there's a line in this letter from Montgomery that says the water may flow across the jurisdictional boundary and then out towards the ocean, and that was used that statement was reiterated but counted as a loss of water to the basin if it was flowing out to the ocean. But I agree with what Dave said. The whole point of raising water levels to protective water levels is you're going to lose water to the ocean because water is going to flow out to the ocean. So that is already, if that's happening, that's what you're trying to achieve when you're getting protective water levels as well. So I don't, and if it's not leaving the actual geologic basin, then it's helping.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what I was trying to revisit in my own mind, is this a situation where we would need to go back to the judge and get the jurisdictional boundary adjusted? But I was thinking maybe not, probably not, because the water master could acknowledge this hydrogeologic information and take it into account in their decisions and their planning without having to change the boundaries because they don't have, it's not like they have to do something in particular right over the jurisdictional line. They don't have to do anything relative, they're not going to build something across the jurisdictional line. They, we're just saying it should be taken into account, it sounds like, in figuring out if there really is leakage and what, the questions about protective water levels.
Yeah, effectively, if you're recognizing that and you're taking that into account for water needed in the basin, you would the number that has been cited is the amount of water needed per year to raise water levels plus the amount of water that is flowing across the jurisdictional boundary. So it effectively removes the second part of that equation from the water you need.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, John?
Sure. The number that the water master has cited that it needs for additionally for every year to put into the seaside basin is the amount of leakage, and leakage is defined as flow across the jurisdictional boundary, plus the amount of water that's needed to raise water levels, to protective water levels. If you do as you suggested and say, the jurisdictional boundary is this, but we want to use the knowledge that that's not the actual functional groundwater basin, you would not need to add the leakage number as measured at the jurisdictional boundary to the water you need to raise the water levels, which
Okay.
makes the amount of water you need annually much smaller.
Thank you. Okay.
And,
Any
and,
questions?
and therein lies the bullet of questioning. It's not the need for, but it's the amount of, and that's what we raised is you may have the wrong number.
Mm-hmm.
And we know also that even raising protective water levels, it's a different number if you do it at the coast versus doing it up near General Jim Moore Boulevard. And so there again is, there's the district questioning, well, give us an infrastructure plan for how many feet of pipe you need to inject it at the coast versus General Jim Moore, or how many wells you need to inject it. And then we can actually figure out the trade-off between the cost of a system to inject it in one location versus another location and the cost of water, because you need less water if it's closer to the coast, more water if it's further from the coast. And water is very expensive in this equation. So there's some gaps in the whole planning that the water master has done, and they just kind of jump straight to we need more water in the basin, and it's up to 3,600 acre feet per year. That's our target. Let's go get it. And we just keep raising hands saying, well, if the target includes losses and there aren't really losses, then maybe your target's wrong. And if your target includes an inefficient delivery system further up the hill, then maybe that number's still too high if it could be cost effective to inject it closer to the coast. So there's these little gaps in thinking all along the way that have been problematic for us as the district.
Yeah.
And are these questions all discussed at the TAC? These different scenarios?
Well, I don't think they have been yet, John.
No, they've not been discussed. Just the protective water levels were established at the TAC about 15 years ago and have not been revisited in 15 years, which would be a good thing to take that back out and use more data and kind of try to understand them. I know one of the protective water levels that was set by the modeling, the historic water levels have never been up to the protective water levels. So that's something else that has always kind of bugged me about that one being set higher than historic water levels. But that the TAC would be the appropriate place to take this through and kind of look at all of that and the functionality of the basin and the best place to approach adding water if the goal is to reach protective water levels.
Okay. Let's see if I think Fran would like to
I
add
just wanted
something.
to say one thing. The adjudication decision clearly states that the water master is to work collaboratively with MPWMD. And I think the tone of working collaboratively needs to be improved. And so I would ask our general manager to work out the appropriate approach that we would make. We are not a stepchild to this proceeding. We are a recognized water district. We do have certain authorities. Some are duplicative of the water master, but the judge instructed both entities, the water master and MPWMD, to work collaboratively. So I think we should emphasize that in helping get our points across.
Good job, Fran.
Very good
That's what
suggestion.
I've been waiting on.
Very good.
Very good, Fran.
Yeah, well, Fran, we've been interviewing urban water management plan consultants. And the most recent one said, well, you know, you should be working collaboratively with CalAm on their supply and demand estimates. So,
They need to know the history.
yeah.
Yeah.
Let's jump from this, because the remaining slides on this presentation were just greater detail from the letter, but Maureen has prepared some information on kind of where the district currently stands and where the basin currently stands, and just some thinkings that, you know, we really have the basin's best interests at heart. And I think
That's right.
the tenor of that presentation by the water master was implying that we don't. And you know, I find that to be a little annoying,
Unfriendly.
Heartening. Yeah.
Unnecessary also.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, we all now have firmly in mind the direction to work collaboratively.
I think we have a public comment for that one. I see a hand up.
Yes, Chair Paul, I see Susan Schiavone. I'll stop my share for the moment.
Okay, do you want, so we can take that and then proceed to Maureen's presentation.
Yes, 1 minute, please. Susan, when you're ready.
Hello, everybody. I actually wasn't going to. Well, I did attend that meeting, and I have to concur with the comments made out. There was a lot of defensiveness at receiving that information, and I'm hoping that they can work through that and take some of this information and technically just work together, overcome this initial resistance. And I know that CalAm has some weight on that Water Master Committee as well. So, and I know that there's a lot of, you know, sympathy towards making the solution to our basin problems, the desal. But I do know there's challenges, and I want to support you guys to keep working through that with them. And hopefully you can all get on the same page with them at some point. I think it might take some time just due to all the influences about. Okay, thank you so much for all your hard work.
Thank you, Susan. Glad you attended and appreciate that feedback.
Chair Paul, I see no other raised hands.
Thank you. All right, let's go back to what Maureen has to tell us.
Okay,
Can probably just advance, please, Sarah.
sure.
So we've just looked at this slide on from the April 2nd workshop at the Seaside Groundwater Basin meeting. And we looked at the presentation titled Seaside Groundwater Basin, what's the problem? What I wanted to address was the slide titled Institutional Problems with MPWMD, which we just read through. This is a public document that's out there, and rather address it point by point. My plan is to, over the next few slides, kind of provide the MPWMD perspective on our work with the Seaside Groundwater Basin by summarizing our activities and data related to the basin.
Great.
Next slide, please. So what have we been doing for the last 40 years? Well, we invest in full-time professionally licensed geologists and hydrogeologist staff. We've provided resources, staff, and funding to design, install, operate, and maintain monitoring wells. How do we know what's going on with the groundwater basin? Through monitoring wells. We've been installing monitoring wells since at least 1990, and actually John brought a paper document to my office today that was from 1980. So we've been doing that a while. We've owned over 30 wells and monitoring wells in the Seaside Groundwater Basin. In addition, we're the entity that collects and reports data to DWR through their California statewide groundwater elevation monitoring system. It's a public database that DWR is able to see the entire state's worth of groundwater basins. It's also available to the public. Lastly, we monitor an additional 21 monitoring wells that are owned by others. We've collected Seaside Groundwater Basin level data for the last 45 years. We have also collected Seaside Groundwater Basin water quality data. I have the water quality as a separate line item here. It's easy to lose that. As we talked about earlier, the Seaside Groundwater Basin Water Master Basin Management Plan turned into the Seawater Intrusion Plan uses chloride, kind of salinity, electroconductivity, and molar ratios to declare seawater intrusion. That's largely in agreement with DWR through SGMA. The requirement for seawater intrusion measurement is to measure electroconductivity. You can't just declare seawater intrusion based on level. It's declared using the water chemistry. And I wanted to focus that we have been collecting water quality or water chemistry data for the last 45 years. Next slide, please, Sarah. We have funded, researched, and we continue to test the Aquifer Storage and Recovery Program since the late 90s. We collect data and carefully track the movement of ASR water relative to native water and pure water Monterey water. And you can actually see via water quality, those different water sources move around the basin. We co-funded development and update of the Seaside Groundwater Basin model. I'll just refer to it as model from here on out. We participated in 7 pure water Monterey tracer studies. So what is a tracer study? Well, there's 2 types. There's intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic, you're looking at that water quality data. Native water looks really different than ASR water, and both of those look very different from pure water Monterey water. So you can look at the chlorides in any given monitoring well and have a pretty good idea of what water is passing through there. The same can be said for the production wells. We also, we implemented 2 extrinsic tracer studies. An extrinsic tracer study is where you take non-toxic dye. It comes in a powder form, you mix it with water, and you put it in at the wellhead. That dye is detectable to, I believe, the part per billion level through laboratory analytical equipment. So you can't see the dye, but the labs can absolutely detect it. We implemented 2 of those, we participated in the other 2, and we collected field data for all of the tracer studies. We supported improvement of the model in 2023 following that tracer study data. And additionally, we have, staff has a great deal of experience with ASR and pure water Monterey projects operation. We discovered some pretty neat stuff over the years. So we updated the model in 2023 with that information. And excuse me, lastly, we funded the model runs addressing some technical questions like Seaside Muni replacement well. The city of Seaside had sent us a list of locations, and we ran some evaluations with their different locations to see how they were positioned in terms of pure water Monterey and Jackson. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And we performed a model boundary sensitivity analysis, which says, you know, if the boundary you think is here and the boundary is actually here, how much does that change the answer that the model gave to the question you posed? Next story, or next, next slide, please, Sarah. So I'm trying to break up the high-tech discussion. This is from the tracer study. This is Gus Yates. He's a hydrogeologist with Todd Groundwater, who's been working in the area on our groundwater basin for decades. He's authored several papers. And you can see him on the left opening the packages of the tracer study dye. And on the right, that was just after getting the powder into the various containers. John and I were watching safely outside the fence behind our trucks, because as you see, it really gets everywhere.
Yeah.
Next slide, please, Sarah. And this is John Lear and our hydrologist, Corey Steinmetz, on the left. They figured out a great way to mix that powder without getting it all over everywhere. It's nice and neat and wonderful. And on the right, you can see what happened when you try to add that liquid. The dye is just pervasive. We also have William Banker Hicks in that photo, who's our geologist in training. So and I'm hiding safely behind a communications cabinet taking the photos. All right, so what else have we done besides monitoring? Well, we've certainly spent a lot of effort getting replacement water supply constructed. We constructed the ASR site in addition to operating, collecting data, reporting, and providing maintenance for those sites over the last 25 years. We funded and owned the operating ASR injection site. Additionally, we've invested funds and staff time to design, permit, and construct the Pure Water Monterey project. We provided 75% of the upfront cost. In addition, we provided staff to manage the construction, testing, and startup of their injection well field in 2020, and when 2 more wells came online in 2022. Lastly, and soon to be realized, we invested funds and staff time and procured grant funds to design, permit, and construct the Pure Water Monterey expansion project. Next slide, please. So, you know, to quote Lin-Manuel Miranda, the world kind of turned upside down in 2020. That's a third of the water supply going into the groundwater basin. The groundwater basin, what's called natural safe yield, was met beginning in 2022. Natural safe yield is the amount of water the court adjudication determined to be safe for the basin. You can withdraw this amount of water every year and you won't go into overdraft. So that's in the adjudication decision. And it's been a few years. So how are the water levels responding in the Seaside Groundwater Basin coastal subarea, which of course is the area along the coast that's most at risk of seawater intrusion, and in the coastal subarea to the east, that's where most of the project water goes. So being an engineer, I couldn't get away with just pictures, and I have to provide some charts. There's going to be one series of graphs from the shallow aquifer, the Paso Robles aquifer in the Seaside Groundwater Basin. There will be one more slide from the Santa Margarita aquifer. That's the deeper aquifer in the Seaside Groundwater Basin, and that's where all the project water overwhelmingly is getting injected. We'll start from the coast to the eastern wells to the wells to the south of the groundwater basin. Next slide, please, Sarah. So again, this is for the shallow aquifer, the Passover Oval, and the project water is overwhelmingly going into a different aquifer. If you look at the left graph, you can see, the water levels were going down for a while in the 80s and the 90s. They came back up in the 90s for a bit, kind of started to decline, came up a little bit more in 2009 when Bayonet Black Horse pumping stopped in favor of Marina Coast Water District irrigation. And then beginning about 2015-ish, as golf course pumping resumed, the water levels went down. But if you look kind of beginning around 22 or 23, if you can see that, it's actually really helpful to have this on the screen. The water levels are appearing to rebound. I'm pretty conservative, but to me, that looks like a great trend. If you look at the middle column, those wells are slightly east of General Jim Moore. You'll see a somewhat similar pattern with less of an obvious rebound, but I think a rebound since about 2022. And for illustration, there are a number of monitoring wells in the southern end of the aquifer, and they are under different influences, as you can tell by straight lines, for sure on the middle plot, fairly straight line at the Kmart well, and FO1 shallow is probably more under the influence of the Laguna Seca subarea. And
It's
nearby,
Kmart.
there was a Kmart.
There was. There was?
It's Home Depot now.
Oh, okay. I missed something. Okay. Thanks.
So if we could go to the next slide, please, Sarah. So these are how the levels are responding in the deeper aquifer where all of the project water is going. And in 1995, the cease and desist order on the Carmel River directed Cal-Am to shift pumping from the river to the Seaside groundwater basin. In the early 90s, Joe Oliver, John's predecessor geologist and hydrogeologist for the district, had discovered really the Santa Margarita aquifer and constructed the Peralta well again in the very early 90s. So you can see that in the 90s, the level definitely drops. In my opinion, you can kind of see some points where the slope of the curve might shift. But if you look to the right, it's definitely not getting worse. And that's a long history to provide on one plot, but it's going to be interesting anyhow. It's not getting worse. The middle column is the same. Those deep wells are on the east side of General Jim Moore Boulevard. It's a similar pattern. And then I provided two more that are kind of to the south. One's in the middle of the aquifer, showing that there is different behaviors in different sections, that not everything is, it's not one big tank. Next slide, please, Sarah. So looking forward, we look forward to more water coming this winter. We look forward to collecting the data and looking at the effect of the 25-year, 700 acre-foot a year payback by Cal-Am to the groundwater basin. And we believe there are many other points of agreement between the organizations. We look forward to being able to talk about where we agree and moving forward based on that agreement. Are there any questions?
Can I add one thing, Maureen? If we go back to the most recent plots, so back to, yeah, perfect. Maureen got it exactly right, where we see pumping moving down into the deeper zones in the 90s, and then the basin becoming adjudicated. But the point that I see when I look at this is the mechanism of the adjudication decision had a series of 10% ramp downs every 3 years to pull back the pumping to what Maureen correctly characterized as natural safe yield. So you can that's how much water you can take out of the basin every year without continuing to increase the overdraft. But what this slide doesn't show you is what the water levels would look like after the 25-year payback. We've simply stabilized the water levels, if not made them start to kick up a little bit. But we shouldn't look at these plots and say the adjudication decision isn't working because the water levels haven't come back up, because that's the second part of the adjudication, the 25-year payback, that was the mechanism to cause the water levels to come back up. And that's just what I see when I look at these plots.
Okay, one question from me through the chair, if I may. Have the technical committee or the water master seen these charts that y'all just put up?
They've not been, they were just generated, and this is the first time they've been presented in any committee.
Oh, okay. So how will we go about getting this to the technical committee and the water master of what we just seen? Any ideas? I will put you in front of the whole peninsula. And you know where I go with this? Should we do this public at a board meeting?
Well,
hey, help me out.
Yeah, so our recommendation to this committee is to refer this whole issue up to the full board. And our recommendation to the full board would be for more communication to the water master. In many respects, a summary of the PowerPoint that you just saw, and maybe a restatement of the common ground that we have with them. But I think that those elevation charts, the last 2 pages before the end, I think we should convey them to the water master, because just what John said is true, which is you can visually see stability or even slight recovery in the past several years. But it's not going to end there, because there's a replenishment obligation that will further raise water levels, and the Pure Water Monterey expansion coming online will not be immediately fully usable. So there's going to be a surplus. And this is also where I keep trying to point out to the people involved, there are many things happening for which they've not studied the outcome. For example, if you have surplus Pure Water Monterey expansion water that is being delivered and purchased and injected into the ground, and it's too much to use, CalAM's got a choice to make. It's utilize the native groundwater, utilize the Pure Water Monterey water, or leave something in the ground. And the answer is going to be, you're going to have to leave something in the ground, and it'll either be Pure Water Monterey water, or it'll be native water. Obviously, we have ASR currently stored in the ground, about 4,000, a little over 4,000 acre feet. So these impacts of stored water, even if ultimately it's going to be taken out of the ground in 10 years or 15 years or longer, for the time that's resident, it has an impact. It has protective water levels. And none of that's been analyzed by the water master yet. And so when you ring the bell saying we need replenishment water, we need to find water to purchase, well, that water's actually finding them beginning November, December of this year. And no one's asked Montgomery to model it. And frankly, they should. But for now, to really answer Director Edwards' question, I think we have a similar presentation to our board And I would ask the board to direct that we communicate some of this information to the water master. And
perhaps do a presentation to the Water Master Board?
that's what I think we would recommend. I think they could direct their own TAC to make a presentation, but the water levels over time, those little blue line graphs, those are very interesting because it absolutely tells a story. It doesn't say that we're back, but it suggests that we're stable. And so these other things that are happening, the inputting of Pure Water Monterey expansion water, you know, they should themselves say, what's that going to make that line do?
Mm-hmm.
And it should be the kind of discussion that the TAC of the water master should have.
Mm-hmm.
But we could perhaps lead them to that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well,
Fran, did you have?
Again, a little history. In the adjudication decision, the judge said, well, MPWMD, you've had this authority, you could have stored water, we don't see any activity by you. And therefore, I think Maureen's slides are very telling of the level of activity. And sometimes activity takes time, like all the work that was done in the 90s before you actually see injection that, you know, ASR was the first one to go into the Seaside Basin. Now you have Pure Water Monterey, and you will also have Pure Water Monterey expansion. So bringing us to the current time, I think, is valuable information for the representatives on the Water Master Board. The other thing that I think the charts that Maureen showed, particularly in the Santa Margarita base, that level, is it was a pristine, unused basin. Everybody was at the Paso Robles prior to that time. And it was through Joe's research and testing that this became, you know, the primary place where we are getting water. And she made the statement that with the Carmel River decision by the State Water Board in '95, Cal-Am was told, go pump more in Seaside. And you clearly saw the decline in the late 1990s. That's when we were up to 5,000 to 6,000 acre feet, because that's what had to be done to meet the ramp downs on the Carmel River. But if you combine the reductions under the adjudication and, you know, the levels recovering based on some of the water storage, and the reductions in the Seaside Basin, those charts do tell a very promising story. They may say, well, you know, you've had some heavy rain years. Well, you had a very heavy rain year in 1995. Look where those levels were.
Yes.
You know, so thank you very much. So I
Yeah.
think what staff has put together is critically important. I think people need to have a full picture presented, and I hear positive statements moving forward, which I would love to see you do. So thank you.
Thank you,
Well,
Fran.
one of the biggest problems that we got is who's going to represent, or who is representing the ratepayer. You got Cal-Am paying 85, probably, I'm going to throw out a number, 85% of the water master. The other 15% Seaside and the other users of it. So how do you flip that around, that we're representing the ratepayers and we're not trying to bump heads with the water master, but we're trying to look for the best solution and the best cost-effective solution. You know, when the judge gave us the adjudication, said replenishment of 700 acre feet, you know, water master kicked it up to 3,600 feet. Who's looking out for the ratepayer? So that's my problem that we got in putting this information out. I'm not trying to bump heads with them, but somebody got to look out for the ratepayers, which is us. then just say, we need 3,600 acre feet. And the only way we can get that 3,600 acre feet in there is with a desal project right now.
Mhm.
So that's why I'm going with this, you know, that's why I'm, you know, I'm not trying to bump heads with them, but somebody got to look out for the public. And it's sad to say it's all public agencies on that, besides a couple of, you know, CalAm and the other land users that pump out of the basin. So if y'all can figure out how we can tell them, I'd love to hear.
And to Director Edwards' point, there is a clear undercurrent's not the right word, but the Water Master has even written in its recently updated website that only a desal plant can provide the water needed for protective water levels. I mean, it's right there in print. And so there's a cadre of folks who sit on the Water Master whose orientation is, we need a desal plant to provide protective water levels. And that's part of the motivation for picking a big number and saying, here's what we need every year, with no infrastructure plan in place to actually kind of say, this is how we would do it if we had the water. And so I think that that's part of the reason they went straight to the institutional problems at the district. So there's, you know, there's just a lot of, there's more to it going on than just protecting against seawater intrusion.
Yeah.
Dave, I wonder, I'm just thinking of myself as, you know, a member of the public, or imagining that I'm on the Water Master board, and I'm going to listen to this new information that, well, first of all the information that Fran presented, how long we've been doing these activities, just as information presented, you know, people can have a packet, they could read along how long it's been going on, what the district has been doing, and then this newest information, and it just really neutrally, I don't know if it could, you could do that, you're good at that. And then open it to questions, one person at a time, and, you know, from the people in the Water Master, some of these points, and just answer the questions, you know, without prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
Is that doable?
Well, that's kind of part of what we're proposing here, at least
Yeah.
in doing a presentation to our board.
Mm-hmm.
But actually getting the Water Master to sit through a presentation would be challenging. You know, we've made a few suggestions for things, and they've, you know, kind of like the videotaping of their meetings. We can only push it so far. They've got to decide that they want to do it. Well, they've decided not to talk about it, so we'll probably, if we can figure out how to do it, we'll do it. But yeah, we're trying to lead that horse to water.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, as Fran said, we have some kind of we have an important position in this that was established legally.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, you staff have taken an important first step in putting this information together in the presentation, and
yeah,
I agree with what you're recommending, to take this to the whole board and to the public to see that. And as you said, we can offer maybe not the identical presentation, but you said some of the information in that very good presentation can offer.
Yeah.
It's a step down there, but a good step would be for us to put it out publicly at a board meeting. So I agree with that recommendation. How about the other directors?
I agree on that.
Yeah,
You know, and it needs to be as soon as possible. Nothing that 2 or 3 months down the road. We need to do it now while it's hot, while
Yep.
it's on everybody's mind.
I think we should add mention of the fact that the adjudication decision directed the water district and the water master to work collaboratively.
right.
Maybe we pull a quote, and thank you very much, Fran, for bringing that to our attention.
That needs to really be said. And
Yeah.
we're not trying to bump heads with them. We just trying to support the ratepayer out there. And I believe that's what we do. And even though those board members over there are ratepayers or are in the basin, they should know what we want to do. We haven't done it since that number been thrown out there 45 years.
It's supporting the ratepayers, but it's also supporting the basin. and
Right.
Our infrastructure, our water infrastructure, which is, we all agree is so important.
Yeah, really look for the most cost-effective way to do both.
Exactly.
But Dave, I appreciate what staff has done and put out. I really do. And we just need to put it out publicly.
Yep.
It's just like taping a meetings. We need to put that on our YouTube, and so that our board members can see what they're talking about over there.
I agree. And I really want to thank Dave and John and Maureen and Fran for educating us and coming up with the, you know, we needed to be educated first. And
Yeah. I think after the board meeting, I think it would be, I know it would be a task. I think it would be a great idea to summarize this, you know, what's with the Seaside Basin, what's going on our website, and have a presentation of this information in the simplest, but, you know, simple but most thorough form that we can, to show historically what we've been doing and some of these traces, you know, that show it going back up. I think that, you know, people look at things like that. It's much easier in some ways than hearing words, is reading them yourself. So
plus we can keep it on a shelf nearby handy for the next time that somebody proposes to shut down the water management district.
yeah, exactly. They wouldn't dare if they saw that. We could send Mike McCullough over to them and he can talk to them.
There you go. Yeah, I do find it a little interesting that we have so much knowledge and we're really kind of the resident expert on a lot of things that people go out of their way not to ask us the question.
So
avoid asking the most knowledgeable source.
Yeah, that's why I'm thinking setting it up with the knowledgeable sources in the room. I'm here to answer your questions with our data.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on
Move
to
along.
number 4, the Fort Ord wells.
Oh,
Yeah, and this is mostly for you informationally, but also there's a couple of highlights. So we dealt with Fort Ord well number 9 about a year and a half ago. We had a cost sharing agreement to replace the shallow well. It was done. So then wells 10 and 11 kind of crept up, and this falls into the category of Marina Coast Water District has become the groundwater sustainability agency for that portion of the Monterey sub-area that's outside of the adjudicated basin. And so we contacted Marina Coast and said, do you want to be the keeper of Fort Ord wells number 10 and 11? And they did an analysis of 10 and determined that it should be destroyed. Well, we own it. I think John weigh in here, but we agree. And so we need to budget in the coming fiscal year for destruction of that well.
Yeah,
And then-
agreed that it needs to be destroyed, and I have a line item in the budget for that.
Yeah,
Does it need to be
then-
replaced?
That is for Marina Coast is establishing the monitoring network out there and is responsible to report to the state that the data from the groundwater system up there. So it's really kind of outside of, even though it's in our district, it's outside of the area we're responsible for. Those wells were initially drilled, as Maureen stated, in the early 1990s as the closure of the base happened. The district was able to get out and start drilling wells to better understand the Seaside Basin. So it really helped us to delineate the Seaside Basin and understand that those wells were drilled north of the Seaside Basin boundary.
So, so Dave, do you think, I know when we destroyed and replaced wells out there, we did the destroying and we didn't do anything for replacement?
Yeah, we did. We participated in cost sharing for the replacement of number 9 shallow.
Okay, now are we planning on doing any cost, if we destroy a well, are we going to do any cost sharing to replace that well?
No, I think right now nobody's indicated a desire to replace it, but if Marina Coast, as the GSA, decided they needed a monitoring well, that would be on them.
Okay.
My takeaway from John is we don't need the data.
That's where I'm going, so we can tell them up front, we're going to destroy, but we're not going to replace.
Well, what we're going to do, Director Alvin, is we have a franchise agreement to use those plots of land with the Army to drill and maintain wells. So we're going to just transfer that over to Marina Coast should they choose to re-drill 10. They'll have the spot with the Army and they'll own that right.
Okay.
And then kind of same thing on 11. We staff-wise at Marina Coast, they've indicated a desire to have it in their portfolio of monitoring wells. I kind of need them to formally say that to us, but then we have this form of assignment that Michael put together for the easement or franchise that John was referring to. And so we'll need to get the Presidios, however they report into the Army, to tell us that the form of assignment is adequate. And so we'll start that process.
Good.
So we have the easement and we would assign it over to Marina Coast Water District with the permission of the military.
Yep.
Okay. So you're gonna approach you have to find out if Marina Coast Water District does want this.
Yeah, they've said they do, but I need them to actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're sampling it tomorrow for water quality, so they're moving it into their monitoring network.
Okay. So just have to talk now to the lawyers for the Army or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's
All
it on
right.
this item, just informational.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any items for next Water Supply Planning Committee agenda? Anything come to mind for anybody on the call? Okay. Anything more from you, Dave?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Just one more, Dave, I see you got the assignment of easement agreement already in this packet. So do that guy go through the full board, or is that something you could take care of?
Yeah, we just need to get the Presidio to sign off on it as adequate. So that'll be the next step.
Okay.
We'll take care of it.
Okay, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Chair, for inviting
everybody.
me in. I
Thank you very
appreciate it.
much.
Thank you for coming
right.
in too. Glad to have
Interesting
you.
meeting. Thanks for all this explanation. It's very complicated.
Nice
It
seeing
is.
you, Amy.
You too.
All right, y'all take care.
Nice being here.
Bye-bye.
Hi all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.